Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. I am doing my January wrap up today. This is my first official wrap up for 2023, and for once I'm actually doing this on time. This is mostly because I didn't read quite as much as I used to, so me doing this wrap up is not as daunting as it usually is. I read 19 books last month, and a few of them were even 5-star reads. It's been a great start to the new year, so let's just jump into it. Here is everything that I read last month in January. Starting off with my first read, which is actually one of my 5-star reads. This is Until You by Katarina Mara. This was my very first time reading Katarina Mara, and I loved it, clearly. I've been wanting to read her for a long time. I've been seeing her books around, and my library finally got her books, so that's how I read it. Until You is book 1 in the Off Limits series. It's a standalone brother's best friend romance. It's also a roommate's romance. Both the main characters are hackers, which was so great to read. So both Arya and Grayson work in computer engineering, but the only thing is that Grayson doesn't know that Arya is this infamous hacker that he's been trying to track down. She's that good at hacking that she's become very well known. The book starts off with Arya catching her boyfriend cheating on her, which then leads to Grayson offering Arya a job at his tech company. And in addition to offering a job, he also offers her a room to stay at his house because she does have to move to work for his company. So these two are now roommates, and I loved the forced proximity here. Grayson is so sweet, so protective over Arya. I loved how good he was to her. I also love the slightly forbidden aspect between them because he's not supposed to fall for his best friend's little sister. She is off limits to him, like the title of the series says. So all this tension builds up between them as they're living so close to each other. They start wanting each other, but trying not to have each other. It's just a really fun read. I had the best time listening to this audiobook. I loved all the hacker stuff, like Arya being so good at coding and hacking was fantastic to read. So these two made a wonderful couple. If you love the brother's best friend trope, you definitely need to read this one. I'm really excited to read more from this author now that I've read this one and loved it. And then I read X's and O's by Amy Lee. This is Amy Lee's second book. She released her debut last year. So this is the follow-up, the standalone sequel to that book. It's set in the same series, the Influencer series. The heroine here is another influencer. She's actually a romance book influencer, which is why I wanted to read this book. And she also loves the same trope as I do, second chance romance, but she takes it a little step further by wanting to play out her own second chance romance in real life. So Tara comes up with this great idea to revisit her 10 ex-boyfriends to see if one of them might have been the one who got away. On this little journey of hers is her new roommate Trevor. So yes, I read 2 roommates romances back to back. Trevor, our hero, is a firefighter who is very anti-relationships and anti-love. He does not want to get into a relationship, but he's willing to help Tara with her second chance romance, only to slowly realize that he's been falling for her this entire time. It's a pretty slow burn romance. Like, it is so slow. In the beginning, you do get to see a lot of Trevor being a man whore. He brings home girls constantly. It wasn't like the best thing to read, but I forgave it just because these two weren't in a relationship. Like, nothing, literally nothing was developing between them for a long time. So it's slow, it's lighthearted, it is a little bit silly with the second chance romance journey, but it was funny to see the situations that Tara would get herself into when she saw her exes again, because there's a reason why they became ex-boyfriends. But because the romance was too slow for my liking, I'm giving this one 3.5 stars, so I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the author's debut book, which I gave 4 stars to. It's fun and enjoyable, but just not quite as good. I then went on a little sci-fi / monster romance binge after that. So I read a Ruby Dixon book. I read The Half-Orcs Maiden Bride. It's been a long time since the last time I picked up a Ruby Dixon book, and sadly this one was just okay. I give it 3 stars. I think this might be my first actual monster romance from Ruby Dixon. Like, he's not a blue alien, he's not a shifter, he is an orc, he's a half-orc. The heroine is a spinster. She's 30, she has no money, and she has no prospects. So the worst position a woman could be in, right? But then her father finds her a new husband, and he is a half-orc, which means that he can match her tall and curvy size. The romance here was fine. I wasn't really wowed by it or anything. It was sweet, light and fluffy. It didn't feel anything unique or special. Like, it was fine to read, but then as soon as you finish it, you'll instantly forget it. But if you are looking for a monster romance with a marriage of convenience, you might want to try this one. The book is mostly just these two navigating their new marriage and very happily falling for each other while doing so. The hero is a very good guy who treats his wife wonderfully. The next monster romance that I read has a Kraken hero, so there are some tentacles. This is The Kraken Sacrifice by Katie Robert. It's book 2 in the Deal with the Demon series. Even though I was a little bit disappointed with book 1, I still held out hope that I would enjoy the sequel, mostly because of the Kraken stuff. So I was hoping this one would be better, but sadly it was not. I gave this one 3 stars, just like book 1. We have yet another heroine who makes a deal with a demon and then gets auctioned off to a monster, who of course is the Kraken hero. And the romance here was surprisingly kind of depressing. Catalina has literally been neglected and abused her entire life, and now she's experiencing the same thing with her Kraken. Thane kind of sucked as a hero. He was very neglectful of Catalina. He just came across as a very selfish hero who didn't care too much about the heroine until towards the second half of the book. Like, he'll give her orgasms, but that's pretty much it. So I can't say this was a very fun romance to read. The sex was hot, sure, but otherwise it wasn't the best. So unfortunately, this monster romance series has not been good to me so far. My next read is a sci-fi romance. I actually thought it was going to be a monster romance, but nope, the hero is not a monster. He is an alien who looks like a human. This is The Kreenar Captive by Anna Zares, and I gave this one 3.5 stars, so it was slightly better than the last 2 monster romances, but still not great. It starts off with a heroine about to die. You're literally just thrown into the story. So Emily is about to die in the Costa Rican jungle until she's saved by our alien hero, Zarin. He helps her heal with his magic sci-fi powers, and because he heals her, he thinks that he now owns her. He thinks that she belongs to him now, sort of like a pet, and it was actually kind of funny to read because Emily is like, absolutely not, you don't own me, I'm gonna go now. But Zarin, being the big bad alien, doesn't let her go, so she does put up a fight with him. It's a very lust-filled fight because of course he's very, very attractive to her. The chemistry is high here. They end up having a ton of sex. The plot itself is a fairly typical alien romance. The heroine is human and then she finds out that aliens exist. She falls in love with an alien and now has to live in this whole new world. And I only found this out after I finished reading this book, but apparently The Kreenar Captive is part of a whole alien sci-fi world from this author. Like, this isn't the first book, it's probably not the last book in this world. So I totally missed that Anna Zares had a bunch of other sci-fi alien romances already. This one I think might be a prequel, so I should continue with the rest, but it's not like high up on my TBR. The world building here was good at least, even though you're thrown into this world, but it was fun, so I wouldn't say no to reading more from this author. I then read Losers Part 1 by Harley LaRue. I was weirdly excited for this one to come out because even though I didn't like The Dare, which is the prequel novella to this book, I was still excited to read Losers because it's a reverse harem romance. The Dare was not really, or at least it didn't seem like it was, but Losers is definitely reverse harem, poly, why choose? There are 3 parts to the series. Like I said, The Dare is the prequel, which you definitely should read before getting into Losers, and then Losers has part 1 and part 2. The Dare is set in college, and then Losers has 2 books, part 1 and 2, and these ones are set a couple years after The Dare. The heroine Jess was your cliched popular girl in high school. She was prom queen, cheer captain, and she was a bitch to anyone who wasn't part of the popular crowd. So she was a bully to our 4 heroes back in high school who were part of the unpopular emo crowd. But then one night in the Dare novella, Jess and the 4 guys, Manson, Lucas, Jason, and Vincent, they do hook up, but then Jess ends up ghosting them after that. Now in present day, at the start of Losers Part 1, Jess has graduated college and she is back in town temporarily. The guys all live together, they run a car shop in town, and they've never stopped thinking about Jess since that night, and she's never been able to forget them either. So when they finally reunite after all these years, the chemistry is just as insane as it was that night. Then this incident happens that causes Jess to be in debt to the guys, and she offers to pay them off with her body. It's an MMFMM polyamorous romance. All the guys love each other. They definitely play with each other, though they mostly do just pair up as well. Like Lucas and Manson are a thing, and then Jason and Vincent are a thing. We get into some kinky stuff just like in the Dare. There is a lot of role playing, but it's all very consensual, and the guys were a lot nicer than I remember them being. They are so sweet to Jess, even though sometimes she doesn't deserve it. Honestly, I don't even know why they fell for her so hard, but whatever. I was in it for the guys and I was in it for the smut, which definitely delivered. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars, though surprisingly I'm not in a huge rush to read the sequel, to read part 2. This first part doesn't end on a super awful cliffhanger or anything, so I'll get to part 2 eventually. It's just not high up on my TBR. And then I read The Cursed Crown by Alexi Blake, who's also known as May Sage. I think both of the names are on the official Amazon page. I mainly wanted to read this one because I got this special edition from the Arcane Society book box, and the cover is stunning. I mean, look at these end pages. They're so beautiful. So it's a fantasy romance, and the only bad thing about it is that it's too short. It's less than 300 pages, which is not always a good thing for fantasy. That being said, I still really enjoyed myself. I gave it 4 stars. It was my first time reading this author, and I still thought it was great. This is the first book in a series, the Darker Woods series, though this book does end on a happily ever after, so if we do get other books, they'll probably be about different couples. The heroine Rissa is half fae, and she's literally the only heir to the Seelie court crown, but she's been living in the woods by herself for 100 years because she wants nothing to do with the crown, let alone rule a whole kingdom. Then the hero shows up telling her that she has no choice but to do her duty and take up the crown. Rediker is king of the Unseelie court, and he does make it difficult for her to say no, but she eventually does agree to go with him to the official courts, but only because she wants to go off on her own to find this powerful being called the Cursed Prince to take her place to rule in her stead. It's a very fast-paced book because we have so few pages and we're thrown right into this story, into this world. It took me a little while, but I eventually did get the hang of it. I got the hang of the whole world building, and I did really like it. I love the road trip aspect of it with Rissa and Rediker traveling together to the courts. The romance is a sort of fated mates romance, which I love reading, but again, I just wish there had been more of it. I wish we had more time to develop the romance and the world a little bit more. If it had been a longer book, or maybe this couple had more than one book, this could have been amazing because it had so much potential. But overall, for like a shorter fantasy romance, it was still fun to read. It just definitely could have been better. My next read was Irish Crown by Nashada Rose. This one I gave 3 stars to. It's been a long time since the last time I read something by this author. I mostly only read her dark romances, and this one is more on the regular contemporary side, just with some romantic suspense. The book starts off the morning after Eva and Declan's very hot one-night stand, and unfortunately he's kicking her out stat because he's got, quote, shit to do. He orders her a cab, but she decides not to take it out of spite, and on her way walking back home, she ends up getting mugged. After that, she never expects to see Declan again, but then when she goes to work, he shows up asking her, actually no, demanding her to tell him what happened with the mugging, because of course he was able to see it through some security cameras. Declan is your typical alpha player hero who never sleeps with the same woman twice. His usual MO is to kick them out the next morning, like he did with the heroine here. But as he gets to know her more after learning about the mugging, he sees her as something different, of course. The romance and the plot were okay. They're nothing original. It actually reminded me a lot lot of old school Kristen Ashley with how overbearing the alpha hero is, always demanding. And there's the funny way that these kind of alpha heroes talk, which gets annoying to read. There's also the suspense part with the heroine being in danger after that mugging, but honestly it wasn't all that memorable. So this one was just an average read for me. I've definitely read better from this author. Maybe her dark romances are just better in general. But yeah, this one was just alright. I then read a mafia romance. I read Until Forever Ends by Adelaide Forrest. This one I gave 4.5 stars too. I've been loving the series because of how wild it is. It's book 2 in the Beauty and Lies series. It's a dark mafia romance series that follows the same couple. The hero is this Spanish mob boss who is insanely obsessed and possessive of the very young heroine. The second book picks up right where book 1 left off, and now we get to see a much darker side to Raphael, because in the first book he was actually trying to be a little nicer and make Issa fall in love with him genuinely, but now all the smoke screens are off. Now she knows the truth about him and she understands that he's a monster, but he is her monster. If you love villains for heroes, you'll enjoy Raphael. He's very much a touch her and you die type of hero, like literally. He gets very dark and very graphic in the second book. If you need consent in your romances, you definitely will not want to read this series. The heroine is literally at the mercy of the hero and he does some fucked up shit. Tip of the iceberg was the whole branding scene. I was like, oh boy, this is getting rough. But it's the type of read where it's so insane that I love it. It's so entertaining to read. I'm just having so much fun with the series so far, as wild as it gets. That being said, there wasn't quite as much plot in the second book. There's mostly just twists and reveals towards the end. Still, I thought it was great. And again, if you do want to give the series a try, there are all the triggers for dubious consent, for non-consent, all that sort of stuff. And then I read another 5-star read, which is Mixed Signals by B.K. Borison. It's book 3 in the Love Light series and I loved it so much. It's my favorite of the series so far because Layla and Caleb were so adorable. We have a hero who's been pining over the heroine since forever and she has no idea. He goes to her small town bakery every single week. He orders the same stuff so he can get a little glimpse of the heroine, and Caleb, being in this unrequited love, has been hell on his dating life. Layla herself has also had some bad luck with dating, so these two end up making this sort of proposition. The two of them will date for 1 month with no strings to see what they've been doing wrong with their dating lives. So it's sort of a fake dating romance, but not really, because they do actually date. There's just an expiration date. But these two are so freaking cute together. I love them. I loved how Caleb was basically just trying to make Layla fall in love with him for real. It was so sweet, so feel good. We have two very precious characters who need to be protected at all costs. I'm also always a sucker for foodie romances, and Layla being a baker heroine was also another plus for this book. So overall, I loved it. I adored the romance. This was definitely a 5-star read. I then read Do I Know You by Emily Wibberley and Austin Sigmund Broca. I was not a fan of the author duo's last adult romance, and I'm sad to say this one wasn't that great either. I did have higher hopes for Do I Know You only because it sounded better. It had an interesting premise and it was at least slightly better than the roughest draft, but I still gave this one 3 stars. I don't know what it is about this author duo, but they write the most pathetic characters that I don't have any sympathy for. So this is a marriage in trouble contemporary romance. Eliza and Graham are about to celebrate their 5-year anniversary at this resort, but their marriage has become very stale. Awkwardly, they meet someone who thinks that they're both single and tries to hook them up, matchmake them together, and these two don't tell the truth that they're married because, one, it would be super embarrassing to say, oh, this person who I'm not really showing any affection or familiarity with is actually my spouse. And then they sort of want to do this role play where they meet and fall in love for the first time again, just so they can spice up their marriage. So in theory, this one sounded good. It sounded interesting and different, but oh my gosh, these characters were so bland and so boring. Honestly, all they had to do was just talk to each other to explain to each other how they're feeling about their marriage, but no, they just dug their head into the sand, especially the heroine. They weren't as unlikable as the main characters from The Roughest Draft, which is why I didn't hate this one as much, but it wasn't all that great either. My next read was What Lies Beyond the Veil by Harper L. Woods. I've been very curious about this fantasy romance, mainly because the author is also Adelaide Forrest, the author of the Beauty and Lies series, which I've been loving. So she writes dark romance under the Adelaide name, and then this fantasy romance under Harper. This is the first book in the Of Flesh and Bone series, and it was not too bad. I gave it 3.5 stars. It's definitely not as good as the Mafia romance series, but it was a good start. It was mostly the ending of the book that was the most interesting, which you could say for a lot of fantasy romances in general. So in this world, humans and fae exist, but they've been separated for 400 years through this thing known as the Veil, which has been separating the two worlds, and the humans hate the Fae. They want nothing to do with the Fae. The heroine Estrella is a Fae-marked human, which means that she has a mate that is Fae, and this also means that she's marked for death because the humans, the Mist Guards, don't want the Fae-mark to be united with the Fae because that only makes the Fae stronger. And now, in order to survive, Estrella is on the run, and this is where she comes across the hero Kylem, who is also another Fae-marked human. He becomes her companion, her protector, and somehow these two fall in love. I didn't really see it, but they do fall for each other. He gets very possessive and jealous over her, sometimes a bit much, but it's was nice to see, I guess. The romance, sadly, wasn't all that exciting just because both of them are Fae-marked, which means they're true mates. Their fated mates are not each other, or at least they're supposed to be Fae. 90% of this book is pretty boring though, I will say. It was just gonna be a 3-star read, but then we got to the ending, which did bump this rating up for me just by, you know, 0.5. So most of the book is a little underwhelming. It's not the best, but it does have potential. And then we finally get to the ending with the big reveal, the big twist, and this is when things get very predictably exciting. You can literally see exactly what things are gonna happen. You can pretty much guess how things are gonna go, what the reveal is, but I found that I didn't really mind that I could predict everything here, mostly because we finally get some action and something interesting was finally happening to the romance. Overall, this one I'm giving 3.5. It's not, you know, the best fantasy romance ever, but it does have potential, and I am definitely gonna continue with the rest of the series just because I want to know how things are gonna go. I didn't realize that January was quite the month for fantasy romances for me because I ended up reading yet another one. This is Crown of Crimson by Karina Halley. This is a sequel to a book that I really enjoyed last year, which was River of Shadows. So this is book 2 in the Gods of Underworld series, and you definitely need to read the books in order. They follow the same couple. The series is inspired by Finnish mythology, and it's also inspired by Beauty and the Beast and Hades and Persephone. In book 1, Hana traded her life for her father's, so she became the god of death's prisoner in his stead, and she's also been promised to be his bride. So book 2 picks up right where book 1 left off, with Hana trying to go see her father, leaving death behind. She tries to leave the underworld against his wishes, and he gets hurt and pissed that she left him. And when he gets her back, because he definitely is able to find her, all that trust, that love that was building between them is broken. So book 2 is Hana earning all of that trust, that love back again, and also proving to him, proving to the whole underworld that she does have what it takes to be queen. We get to learn so much more about this world, about Hana's family, about Death and the villain of the series, who is Death's demon ex-wife. Like, she's literally a demon. I'm not just saying that. I thought the sequel was great. I give it 4 stars. I loved that we got Death's point of view in this book because we didn't didn't in book 1, or at least not really. It does end on another sort of cliffhanger. It's not quite as bad as the first book, but I am really excited to read more of this series. And then you all know I had to read the new Jessica Cain. This is When the Farmer Met the City Girl. It's another farmer smutty novella from Jessica Cain. This is not her first one. Here, the heroine gets stuck in the middle of the road and is about to freeze to death until the farmer hero shows up. He sees her, he rescues her, and it's very much lust at first sight and love at first sight for him. He gives her a room to stay while trying to stay respectful and hide all his drooling over her. He knows that she's not for him because she's a city girl who dreams of making it big in Hollywood, and he's just a lonely farmer, but he wants her anyway and he will have her. So it's hot and quick. It's another typical Jessica Cain read. It's not amazing or anything. I give it 3 stars, but you get exactly what you expect. And then I read Final Offer by Lauren Asher, which is the 3rd and final book in the Dreamland Billionaire series, which is quite big. I did not like the first book, but then I really enjoyed the second one, so I was hoping this last one would be like the second one for me. Thankfully, it was a good read. I gave it 4 stars, though book 2 is still my favorite. I'll try to keep this spoiler free and not say the big stuff, but I will talk about the things that are mentioned in the blurb and the things that we already know from the previous 2 books if you've read them. So this 3rd and final book is Cal's romance. Cal is the middle brother. He's the one who is not a grump, unlike the other 2 guys. He is bright and charming and silly, but this is mostly because Cal is hiding his problems with alcohol. And just like in the previous 2 books, Cal does have to follow his grandfather's will in order to receive his inheritance. He has to return to the place that he promised never to go back to, which is his grandfather's summer lake house, which is where Alana, the heroine, lives in. So it's an angsty but sweet second chance romance with a heroine who hates the hero for breaking her heart. They were childhood best friends turned childhood sweethearts, and now they're nothing because of Cal's alcoholism. Alana was a great heroine. I loved her character. I loved how she was it for Cal. I loved how she was the only woman for him, but his addiction ruined things between them. My only complaints about this book is that I wish there had been a little bit more groveling. It felt like Alana took him back a little bit too easily, and I also wish that the addiction problem wasn't addressed until way towards the end of the book. That part happened too quickly and easily for me, especially when Cal has been dealing with this for 6 years. So I do wish we'd gotten a little bit more time with the recovery part, but overall it was still a really sweet romance. If you love second chance romances, you'll probably enjoy this one. Cal is just a very sweet guy. He's a sweetheart, especially towards a certain someone that I don't want to say because of spoilers. I like that he was so different from his brothers, and I also loved how we finally get to see that brotherly love between them. So it was a good read, not my favorite, but it was at least a good finale for the series. I then read Restore Me by J.L. Seegers. I read this for my book club, Ravished by Romance, and I'm still not sure how I should rate this one. I'm in between 3 and 3.5 stars. I had really high expectations for it because I know a lot of people love this one, and it was good, but it wasn't the amazing read that I was expecting. For one thing, it was just way longer than it needed to be, like 200 pages longer than it should have been. It was long and wordy and dragged out, but the heart of the book, the actual plot, was great. It's a forbidden romance between the heroine and her dead husband's best friend. It's got unrequited love, secret pining, and enemies to lovers. So 4 years ago, Sloane lost the love of her life, her college sweetheart Eric. His best friend Dominic is the hero and the one who's been in unrequited love with Sloane for a decade. She has no idea that he's been in love with her this whole time, mostly because he treats her terribly, which is where the enemies to lovers part comes in. She also doesn't know, or at least doesn't remember, that he was actually the one who met her before she met Eric. So Dominic did have a claim on her first, but she was just too drunk to remember. Now in present day, Dominic and Sloane are working working together, much to Sloane's reluctance because she doesn't like Dominic. But this is when the dynamics between them are finally starting to change. All of a sudden, Dominic isn't quite as awful as he used to be, and as these two spend more time together, the chemistry just amps up. The book is hot, like these two are very hot together. The chemistry is great, but there were a bit too many sex scenes. It just got to be too much and unnecessary and definitely dragged the book a lot. The middle of the book is where things slowed down and nothing was really happening. I had to speed up my audiobook just to make things go quicker because I was getting bored. And then we get to the ending, which wrapped up way too quickly, especially given how slow things had been moving. So the pacing wasn't the best, but the writing itself was good. It was solid. I would want to read more from J.L. Seegers. This was my first book from her. I think this was her debut, and I do want to continue with the series because the next 2 or 3 books are about the couple that was set up in Restore Me. I'm just hoping the author got a better editor because a lot of things definitely could have been left out and the story would have been so much better. My next read was a historical romance. I read Reckless by Amanda Quick for the Historical Hellions book club. This book was so much fun. Oh my gosh, I adored it. I give it 4 stars, and controversial, but I think this might be a little bit better for me than Ravished, which I also gave 4 stars to. It's only my second book from Amanda Quick, my second historical romance from her, but I have been enjoying them so much. I adore the banter in her books. This one has an interesting romance because the main characters are both antique book collectors. Phoebe is the reckless, daring heroine who's been trying to reach the hero, reach Gabriel, because she wants his help in tracking down this special book. Gabriel finally accepts. He finally decides to meet her at this midnight rendezvous, which is honestly the most random thing, but I loved it. Unfortunately for Phoebe, Gabriel is the complete opposite of a chivalrous knight that she expected him to be because she actually knew him years ago when he tried to save her sister from an unwanted marriage. But don't worry, he didn't actually have feelings for that sister. He was just a chivalrous knight. But he's no longer like that after he was ruined by Phoebe's father. He's become jaded, a little bit bitter, and he's just a sarcastic loner. He doesn't really want anything to do with other people, but Phoebe does intrigue him and he just wants to know everything about her now. They do end up working together to find this book for Phoebe, and then they somehow enter a marriage of convenience. I love these two together. I love their banter. I love their chemistry. They are hilarious. So many of their conversations had me laughing, and I loved how much Gabriel just wanted Phoebe. He was really lusting after her. I mean, one time he climbed a roof just to be in the same room as her. So they were adorable together, and I loved Phoebe's family too. Everything about Reckless was just so entertaining, and I had so much fun with it. For my second to last book, I read Whispers of You by Catherine Cowles. This was a 4-star read for me. It was so good. It is the start of a new series. It's another small town romantic suspense, and we have a second chance romance between high school sweethearts, my favorite trope. The main characters, Holt and Wren, were torn apart years ago back in high school after Wren got shot by home intruders. Holt felt so much guilt over not being there for Wren and not protecting her that he ended up breaking her heart and leaving her and leaving town for good. Now in present day, Holt is back home. He's finally back and he's ready to make things right. I really like that Wren gave him hell when he first came back because he definitely deserved it for being gone for so long. I wanted a little bit more groveling, I will say, but I really like these two characters. Their second chance romance is super sweet, very wholesome, and I loved how close-knit this small town is. Everyone is very protective over Wren. They also gave Holt hell and made him work to be forgiven. The suspense plot had to do with what happened back in high school, so I did like how things came full circle. It was not predictable. It definitely had me guessing about who was doing all the killings. Also, as a side note, I loved how Wren was such a great communicator. I read so much about miscommunication. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not, but it is a breath of fresh air when you have a character who knows how to talk, how to communicate her feelings to the hero. Overall, it was a fantastic read from Catherine Cowles, and I'm already excited for more from the series. And then my final read of January was a very popular book that I didn't realize was that big. I went to look at the Goodreads page today and it has over 120,000 ratings, so it's big. But I guess that's because of Book Talk and I'm still not on Book Talk. But this is Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. So I didn't realize it was huge, but I did at least hear about this book. I heard that it was getting picked up. It was originally an indie book, but it got picked up by a publisher. That was pretty much it though. That was all I knew about this book before I started reading it. I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I actually really liked the beginning. It's a sports romance. It was cute. Nothing amazing, but fun enough. The hero is a hockey player and the heroine is a figure skater. Nate is captain of his college team and Stassi is trying to make it to the Olympics. Though apparently I just recently learned that if you're aiming for the Olympics, you probably aren't also attending college or competing for your college team at the same time. But whatever, we have a sports romance between 2 athletes who skate on ice. Something happens though that leads to Stassi losing not only her skating rink but also her skating partner. Now she's forced to share rinks with Nate and his team, which she's not happy about. I didn't really understand why she hated him so much for this because it wasn't really his fault. And then Nate is the type of hero who is very into the heroine, like way more into her than she is into him, which I do admit I like to see. But did I understand why he liked her so much? No. However, I did really like how the heroine wasn't a virgin. Like, that's such a weird thing to like, but I do really appreciate it when I come across a non-virgin heroine. And on top of that, a heroine who actually enjoys sex, because I feel like most of the time heroines are either virgins or when they do have sex, the sex sucks. This girl was queen of friends with benefits, which I don't see a lot, especially not when the guy that she's having friends with benefits with is not the hero. Okay, but let's go back to the romance. The romance itself was okay. The chemistry wasn't really there for me, but the characters were fine. A little one-dimensional, sure, but they were cute together. Was it the worst book that I ever read? No. Was it the best book? Also a no. There's just a lot of positives and negatives about this book. Like, another negative was Stassi's partner. That whole plot was so annoying to read, but all the positives and negatives kind of canceled each other out for me, so I'm giving this one 3 stars. It is kind of funny though how most people seem to either love this book or hate this book, and then here I am right in the middle. But that's it for my wrap up for January. These are all the books that I read so far in 2023. Let me know your thoughts if you've read any of these books. As always, links to everything will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.